This podcast is made possible by Vena. Hello. On today's episode of Planning Aces, we'll be featuring the insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including CFO Christopher Halpin of IAC, CFO Betsy Ward of Mass Mutual, and CFO Ben Chernelek of Symphony. This is Jack Sweeney, your co-host, along with top consultant and performance management guru, Brett Knowles, who will serve as our co-host and resident thought leader on this special AI episode of Planning Aces. Brett Knowles joins us after this. Managing multiple spreadsheets, disconnected data, numbers you just can't trust. Your finance team can't be the strategic partner your organization needs right now with obstacles like that getting in your way. Vena can change that. Vena brings people, processes, and systems together in a single collaborative analytical platform so you can drive connected business planning and better decision making. And it's the only native Excel complete planning platform built for Microsoft 365 with Power BI embedded. With Vena, your financial and operational data is always connected, and your teams are always armed with insights and time to focus on what matters most. So when the stakes are high and the margin for error low, plan with agility, plan with resilience, plan with Vena so you can be prepared for whatever comes next. Visit venasolutions.com/planningaces to learn more about how Vena will help you plan for anything. Hi, it's Jack Sweeney, and hello, Brett Knowles. Now, some of you likely know Brett from perhaps our Workplace Champions podcast, where he's collaborated with me for a number of years now. But Brett is also an FP&A guru. He's been involved in FP&A since about 1990. You can go back to some of the work being done at Harvard that hatched the Balanced Scorecard Collaborative. And he was also involved in a lot of the activity-based costing activity there as well, some of the planning, the whole enchilada, as he likes to say. He is also a frequent speaker at the AICPA FP&A conferences that you might attend. Anything that has to do with the intersection of planning and strategy, you will most likely find some of Brett's work, handiwork. And you told me this earlier, you are a regular on the Rubber Chicken Trail. What is this again, the Rubber Chicken Trail?
Oh, the meals that they give the speakers are typically chicken, but it's never that top quality good chicken. It's the rubber chicken. So it's always called the Rubber Chicken Trail when you're off during conferences.
Yeah, I like that. And it occurs to me I've dined on a few rubber chickens myself along the way. Now, Brett, I know you've done quite a bit of thinking regarding Chat GPT and have some strong opinions and perspectives on it. And you've influenced my thinking in a great way. As we do our interviews with CFOs, I was looking forward to sharing some of what I'm hearing in that regard. We're hearing that regard. And I have three CFOs today that share just sort of top of the mind comments regarding GPT and what their companies are up to with it and other AI technologies. But up front here, I wanted to give you the opportunity to share what I've heard you say before, but I think it's really important, and your familiarity with FP&A and the planning realm just makes this great perspective to share with this audience. So, again, you have an interesting take on things, and what is the message, or maybe messages, that you're trying to get across? And let's share them up front here again, and then we'll share some of the commentary from our finance leaders.
Um, no, to me, the theme, some of the messages that need to get across are: one, GPT is not AI. So it's not trying to make decisions for you. It is exactly what GPT stands for. It's generative pre-trained. So you've got to train it. It doesn't make stuff up. And it's transformation. It's taking what it's been pre-trained on and repurposing it and giving it back to you. That's very different than AI. And so I think and unfortunately, some people use GPT and AI interchangeably. And it's important for this conversation to recognize they're two very different things. GPT, I would put in the category of being useful but not accurate. And as FP&A people, we know what that means. So useful is it's a great thinking tool. It's provocative. It expands your horizons, but it doesn't give you the definitive answer that we need as we lay down plans. So think of GPT as an extra member at the table. It's not the CEO, it's not the CFO, it's not the CHRO, it's an extra person. Well, actually, it's probably more like 400,000 people, but it's just another voice that you take into account as you go about your work. So I think that's an important part. And understand what it gives you should be merely a catalyst to allow you to explore it further, as opposed to hoping it gives you the answer. I think the second thing is a lot of the popular press on GPT talks about what its purpose is in the general world. Well, we're not here to talk about the general world. We're here to talk about a very specific application. And in this application, the GPT has, and if I think of this application, the phases of work we do is there's a bunch of preparation work that we do before we do the planning. Then we do the planning, and then we do something to consolidate plans across business entities, and then we monitor how well those plans are working. And there's a very different purpose for GPT in each of those phases, and it brings something different to the table.
Well, in my way of thinking, and the little I know about Chat GPT, it's all about the prompts. But I would think that FP&A professionals, many of them are already rather advanced in terms of understanding how to prompt the tool correctly. Particularly, and what comes to mind for me anyway, would be scenario planning, where they'll ask uh, chat or what would be the different scenarios that might occur. I could see additional scenarios be surfacing in conversation because of this tool and what might have been pointed out. How am I doing? Do you see this as an obvious application?
And so here's the trick with GPT is it helps process information, but never has garbage in, garbage out been more true. So with GPT, if you don't feed it the right ideas, remember, it is pre-trained. You've got to train it. And if you don't train it with the right stuff, guess what comes out the other end? So input becomes a critical role of us as FP&A people to make sure that we're putting the right inputs in. So one way to answer your question about scenario planning, you can play GPT is say, given these five potential future states, develop for me five scenarios for my industry or five scenarios for this region, for this product. So by beginning to categorize what and you can even put in degrees of certainty. So you might know for sure we're going to have inflation. You might speculate we're going to have an FX issue, and you might guess there's going to be some geopolitical things. So you can put in a confidence interval around these different elements, give them the things that you want it to give you a scenario plan around, and GPT can give you some scenarios. Now, again, I want to emphasize this is not AI. Those aren't the scenarios to use, but they give you enough information that you can flesh them out. And I've tried this myself. I've come up with all the scenarios I think would be reasonable. Then I've given it to chat, and inevitably it comes up with two or three other ideas where you go, that's a brilliant scenario. I should include that. So use one is generate scenarios. Use two is to validate your strategy against its scenarios. So, for example, what that would look like is, given I want to penetrate the European market, what would need to be true? And GPT will take a look at your strategy and tell you what environmental, situational things need to be true in order for that to work. What's fun about that is, instead of creating the scenario and test and then use that to create your strategy, I'm doing the opposite. I'm creating the strategy I want, which we all know that's how most CEOs want to do it, and then say, ask GPT what would need to be true for that to happen. In other words, is the scenario listed by what would need to be true within the realm of the possible, right? So if it comes back with, I'll be bizarre here, Elon will have had to have landed on Mars and occupied it for 18 months and blah, blah. If all those things had to be true, you go, great, that strategy is not going to work because those things can't be true. So you can use it to either create scenarios, you can use it to validate the scenarios you've created. In other words, you create 5 and then say to GPT what would need to be true for these scenarios to occur, or what does it feel the likelihood of those scenarios would be, those sorts of things. Or then finally, do it in the reverse order, throw a dart, set your strategy, and find out what would need to be true.
I just see a situation unfolding over the last year and last few quarters, really, for GPT, where at first it was rather informal with different FP&A professionals experimenting with it on their own, and then it enters and like you described, so when it now has sort of a seat at the planning table, it's just a an accepted tool already.
The scenario that got me hooked first on the FP&A side is, imagine as a planner, we come up with a scenario, a plan that we would like, and we think it's brilliant. And we've all done this. We've taken it to the executive committee and we get laughed out of the room because we missed some major elephant in the room and it just didn't make sense. Now what I can do is, I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, have this brilliant idea. I can go to chat GPT and go, look at this strategy through the eyes of an investor and give me some feedback, and take a look at the same scenario or the same strategy through the eyes of a regulator. Take the same one and take a look at it from competitor, from employee. And what happens is, I can now go to the meeting in the morning with it already being looked at. Now, and the other problem is, when I bring it to the executive committee, that team that's looking at it is only a dozen people, or 7 people. They have the wisdom that they've accumulated over 30 or 40 years of their careers, but that's a pretty limited exposure. And what they've been exposed to in those 40 years is also limited. It might be just your industry or just their function. And so in that room, you've got, at most, now I'm going to say, just I'm not good at math, 10 times 40 years of experience, or 400 years of experience. Now, that doesn't mean it's all accessible, by the way. I've forgotten more stuff than I remember. Or something like that. So you've worked for 40 years, but you're probably accessing 10 years of that experience. When I go to chat GPT, it doesn't forget anything. And it's not just 10 people. It's not just 100 people. It's not just 1,000. It's not just 100,000. You're looking at a huge knowledge base. So when you test it at 2 o'clock in the morning, you've pre-tested it against some pretty rigorous knowledge, well beyond the horsepower of your leadership team. Now, when you bring it to the team, you still need the wisdom of that team, those customers, that market, your products, but you've done some pretty heavy lifting before you get there.
Well, this is great, Brett. I want to share our first finance leader, our first planning ace, who will be Christopher Halpin of IAC. Now, IAC, for those who might not recall, it is Barry Diller's company. You might recall he has a portfolio holding company which manages a good number of different companies. There have been many spin-offs out of this group. And Christopher Halpin stepped into the role, I think, back in 2020. He's been there roughly 2 years now. But he talks about going back to that moment in time when IAC sort of had the clarity of thought to understand what chat GPT was going to bring to that planning and strategy table. Here's what he shared with us.
Yeah, definitely. It's the number one, definitely the fastest share taker of strategic and operational discussions across our companies, and full point of focus. And I would say, there have been a lot of things that popped up, went away, et cetera, as topics du jour over the last 5 years. This one is definitively staying. I mean, this is like the iPhone, personal computers, et cetera. I truly believe that, and people much smarter than me believe that, which would be more important. We got lucky, which was we have our annual planning meeting every year in the late November, early December timeframe, and we have one outside speaker. And this year, Barry and Joey asked Sam Altman to speak to us. And we, in the lucky department, he was talking Friday, and they released ChatGPT on that Tuesday. And so we're sitting at our Wednesday staff meeting, Wednesday kickoff meeting, looking at the Twitter, blowing up on Twitter of what's happening. We're like, wow, look at this thing. This will make it interesting. Of course, he then explains it. And, we ended up, Barry was interviewing him, but we were asking questions, and it probably went for an hour 40. And then that really precipitated, and people started to, use the service, the product themselves. And there are two, key vectors that come out of it. One is productivity improvement, and was also a key point of discussion in our board meeting. And one of our board members said, in Hollywood, scriptwriters are now using ChatGPT to come up with the outline and first drafts of scripts that used to take 6 months for bright shiny things from Harvard and USC to come up with. Now ChatGPT, it's not great, but they can lay out the framework and give you something to work for. And we've heard that in numbers. So we think a lot about the productivity improvements. We also think about the threats and what generative AI means for proprietary IP, which some of our properties have, and also how much it would disrupt the existing search and consumer pathways to information that, for better or worse, exist today.
So a nice anecdote shared by Christopher Halpin, IAC CFO, who, as he shared, that organization received a shot of adrenaline last fall after Sam Altman actually came and spoke at an annual planning gathering. Just a great chapter he shared in episode 890, by the way. But Brett, what did you make of what CFO Chris Halpin just shared?
He does a good job of introducing the concept that genie is not going back in the bottle. Like, this is, in his words, like the iPhone and the iPad. Like, this is, in my mind, this is as big as a disruptor as COVID was. And I like what Chris said, because he kind of mirrored that in his own words. Like, this is occupying huge amounts of mind share. It's definitively staying. And so we can't ignore it. That part, I think, is worth listening to and paying attention to. The second part is, he said that there's sort of two vectors that it's going to impact at least his world. One was productivity. And obviously, as FP&A people, GPT can make us far more productive through things like the scenario planning ideas that we've talked about, but also in terms of monitoring our plans, of identifying disconnects between our plans. So the dilemma with organizations is they're very complicated, and it's easy to have plans that sort of work at cross purposes. So does the sales plan and the marketing plan work cohesively together? GPT can identify that for us, and take hours and hours and hours out of work of identifying where those misalignments are. And it's not going to catch them all, but because it can monitor performance, it will also inform us as we're executing those plans where those disconnects seem to appear. So that's one vector that's useful to us. A second is it helps us identify. Well, he didn't say this. He talked about the second vector's threats, and his theory of threats were it opens up a whole new set of arguments about what is IP. So we've seen GPTs that have created art, they've created music, they've done writing, and all the art, music, and writing is based on work that other artists have done that's been pre-trained on. So it's not creating anything new, it's just repurposing. I saw a brilliant poem written by ChatGPT about the forbidden love between Luke and what's his sister's name in Star Wars?
Leia, Princess Leia.
Leia. So a beautiful, but it's an iambic pentameter. So the person said, do a Shakespearean love poem between Luke and Leia, and it understands the Star Wars story and Luke and Leia being brothers and sisters, and it understands that's a forbidden love, and it understands iambic pentameter, understands how Shakespeare writes, and boom, it has this beautiful. So, but is that plagiarism? Is that IP? Because I've just taken a storyline that existed and I've taken a frame of writing that exists. And so what Chris talks about is the IP attribute. And obviously that's important to him as an investor. As FP&A practitioners, I'm not that worried about IP, but I am worried about understanding threats to the business. And GPT can think of beyond the threats that we normally think about. And so again, we can put in what's our risk appetite and ask ChatGPT to review our plans to see, does it live within our risk appetite? And what are the controls I should put in place to mitigate those risks and so on. So, and those are all part of what we should be putting together in our plan. So I think what Chris opens up is the idea that we need to think about the implications of chat beyond what's in the popular press to how does it help us do our job in the FP&A world.
Okay, well, the next finance leader we'd like to share with you is CFO Betsy Ward of Mass Mutual, large enterprise company carefully taking a hard look at AI and how to apply it to its business practices. Here is Betsy Ward.
No, I do believe that there is a very important place for AI. And in fact, we've already started working in facilitating underwriting of life insurance policies with various with data science techniques. We use AI to help with facilitating how our customers want to interact with us with some of those chat bots that you often hear about. There is a real place for it. At the same time, it's critical, not only because of the regulations, but also because we care about protecting private information. We want to make sure that the AI doesn't misuse personal information. But with that control in place, I see that there's a bright future for AI to facilitate what we do. There will always be a human element. I'm not worried about that. But I think AI will make our lives easier and help make us make better decisions.
Well, it's Betsy Ward, CFO of Mass Mutual. It was great to have her on the show a while back, episode 884. Since we're touching on scenario planning, she has a wonderful anecdote that she shares about some of the scenario planning best practices that she brought to the role of CFO. She's the former chief risk officer of Mass Mutual and got into the CFO role just a number of years ago. Brett, what did you make of what she shared? I have to say, I was surprised. She went right there in terms of letting us know there was certainly an AI story unfolding at Mass Mutual.
Obviously, she's watching her words carefully because she already recognizes that there's competitive advantage to be had by utilizing these tools. She talks about AI, and I'm not sure if she means AI or she means GPT. And as I might have mentioned before, it's a common misconception that GPT is AI. It's not. GPT is just machine learning, basically, on steroids. So it's inching towards it. If you think of a gradation, so stepping back a bit, the magic that's happened here is in the good old days, we just had data. And then we shifted that data to become information. We did that by putting it in a spreadsheet and organizing, let's say the data was just sales. It becomes information when I do sales by region, by product, by salesperson. That becomes information. As humans, we then take that and we create knowledge out of it. We take a look at the information, apply our experience, and we can now begin making decisions against it. And machine learning can replicate that ability to create knowledge or create knowledge from information and help us in that direction. And that's part of what GPT's done. But there's a step beyond knowledge that you could use the word intellect or intelligence or understanding. That's what GPT's done. So, and what that is when I take one body of knowledge and I can apply it elsewhere. So we know, for example, many musicians are really good at mathematics because the principles of mathematics apply to music and vice versa. So that is intellect. That is taking knowledge and applying it in a new space. And that is the big step that GPT's done. So in that continuum from data to information to knowledge to intelligence, we're now seeing that step to intelligence. And eventually it will be AI. The next step is it can make, intelligent decisions on our behalf. I'm saying it's not quite there yet. So as an FP&A person, it informs our decisions. It gives us broader scope. It gives us, a sounding board, but it can't make the decisions yet. So the purpose of us as humans are get the input right, throw it in this machine where it comes out with pseudo intelligence, and then use that to actually apply real live intelligence to it. So it's kind of we're the bread, it's the jam, or whatever metaphor you're looking for. So if she's talking about AI, she's talking about stuff that's beyond GPT. And I have to believe it exists. It just hasn't hit the popular press yet. But I'm sure large pharma companies and big banks and stuff have their hands on that stuff or experimenting with it. So she might really be talking about that. But then she mentions data science, and whether she was talking about AI or GPT doesn't matter. The data science is super important. Garbage in, garbage out. We need to make sure that we've got the right information going in, and we need a way to validate what's coming out the other side. So data science doesn't go away. It becomes more important. So those aspects of what she describes, I think, are important lessons for the listeners to consider as you enter conversations about what you're going to do in your organization. Is it GPT or is it AI? And what do we do about the data? Now, the dilemma with the data is, and we did a survey back at Harvard, and we found that a couple of things. One is, if you take a look at a financial statement, if it has more than 3% errors on it, you disregard the whole thing. In other words, it's got to be better than 97% accurate. Because if it's 96%, you begin to lose confidence in that document and have no idea where the error is, and therefore you disregard the whole thing. In our work with FP&A, we're not trying to produce those auditable statements with that level of accuracy, but we need to be more than directionally correct. So each organization needs to decide what level of precision do I need in order to be confident in the plan that's created. And so where this data science stuff comes in is, what is the quality of data that we need in order for us to feel confident that what we're putting in front of our peers is validated to the level of science that we need in our organization.
Brett, I'm going to keep moving forward here. I know we only have a specific amount of time with you. So I want to share what was part of a conversation we had with Ben Chernolik, CFO of Symphony. Here's Ben.
Whether it was good perspective on our part or pure luck, about 3 weeks before ChatGPT really came to the forefront, we purchased a company called Amenity Analytics that does natural language processing, does AI work around earnings releases. Is one of the more prominent analytics companies in the Wall Street space that's very tied into the type of work that ChatGPT does. So when our board is very supportive of this, and so we brought this company in, and we're explaining to people, what it can do to data, how it helps people understand, the mass. I mean, think about an analyst on earnings day. If you cover the retail sector, those earnings all happen in a condensed period of time, and you may have 25 different earnings reports that come out, and it's impossible for one person to go through and read all that. But if you can take, our Amenity Analytics or something like the work that ChatGPT does and say, here's the 10 things I'm really interested in. I want to understand sentiment. How did the CFO, what were the words that the CFO said? Last time he said these 3 words or she said these 4 words, what happened to the company, right? Are they signaling something either directly or indirectly? And the amount of information that can be synthesized through with these models is really powerful, but it gives people more information on how you invest, right? It gives you better information on investments you want to make. And for me, these are, used the right way, these are all tools that help drive the investment process and reduce manual work that someone had to do at a point.
Okay, thank you, CFO Ben Chernolik from episode 889. He certainly has AI top of mind. Brett, what did you make of what CFO Chernolik shared?
So Ben's interesting because he does talk about one of, I'm going to call it the personas of GPT and what it can do. In his case, just to remind us at least of what I heard, is by looking at the plans and the planning statements we make, people can make a lot of inferences about our strategy, our business, and in his case, make investment decisions. So that ability to analyze text and begin making meaning out of it is useful from his perspective of an investor. It's also useful from our perspective as we analyze our competitors, right? If we could use that same tool he described as we look at our competitors' plans and what we can find out about them, that's great. But that's only one of the personas. So I'm going to say that GPT really has 6 personas that you can ask it. One is, I'm going to say, explorer, which is kind of what he said, what he described, right? That's where we know there's a problem, but we don't really know what the problem is. So explore it, give me some ideas and explore what that might look like. A second role we can assign is that of automator. So automator is when we just want it to do a task. So let's say you're launching a new product and we know there's 8 steps. I want to send an email to people saying the product's about to come. Then I send them one saying the product is, training is available here. Then another one saying, here's a pre-release. So it just automates the process for us and deals with any exceptions to the rule that come up. So in that case, the GPT can decide and implement that whole process. It's sort of a closed system. Third persona is decider. So a decider is when you can feed it an input, plenty of context, but we still need the human brain for execution. And that's most of our world in FP&A, right? So GPT can give you ideas and decision criteria, decision ideas. You still have to, in this case, it could even make the decision for you, but you need to implement. In other words, you could feed all the diagnostic stuff on your car and say, based on all this, your tires are flat. You should go get them fixed. The human goes off and does that. Recommender. Recommender is where it's a more complex system, where GPT is going to take a look at, and this is where I think a monitoring fits in, right? There are multiple repetitive decisions that need to get made, 7 by 24. So it can take a look at all those things, but it's missing the context. The best example here is we're using GPT to monitor abnormalities in the plan. So we think we laid a good plan, but these things, these aberrations are happening that GPT has no idea why they're happening, but it's understood that they're happening and understands the consequence of it. And so it can recommend what you might do, but you still have to make that decision. So not the decider makes a decision for you, recommender just recommends. Eliminator is one step further, right? Where now we're moving towards sort of inherently creative work, which will benefit from this machine learning, but humans still need to get in there to leverage whatever those GPT generated insights are. And then the sixth and final persona is what I call the evaluator. So the evaluator is when there's not enough context. You've got high stakes, and therefore humans have to, generate scenarios, be more careful. And we notice in the evaluator mode, you're typically asking GPT at least 20 questions. So you keep on asking it questions, and through those answers begin forming the next question. And it's a very long process. So explorer, automator, decider, recommender, eliminator, evaluator. And that's, Ben was talking about one of those personas. In FP&A, we actually need all of them at different parts of that process. So I'm going to go sideways for a second. I know that's out of character, but that quote that every plan fails on first contact with the enemy?
That was Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face.
Yeah, punched in the face, right? So the idea is, as we go through this process, our FP&A work is inherently flawed, and it's flawed for basically 3 reasons. And that quote about every plan fails on first contact with the enemy comes back from literally the Persian Wars, where they basically discovered exactly that. What they discovered is, if you think of a plan, we have the desired outcomes. From those outcomes, we develop some plans. From those plans, we take specific actions, and that feeds the outcomes. The dilemma is this: we think that if I take a look at the outcomes I'm looking at and the plans I lay down, the dilemma is there's a knowledge gap between the outcomes you want and the plans you lay down, right? And that difference is the difference between what we know, what we actually know, and what we'd like to know. So if I'm laying down the plan for this year, what I know is Russia and Ukraine are in conflict. That's what I actually know. What I wish I knew is how it comes to fruition, when it comes to fruition, what that outcome looks like, and so on. So that no matter what we do, doesn't matter how good the plan is, because that knowledge gap is inherently, the plans will never be perfect. But then the second part is there's always a gap between the plan that you lay down and the actions that you're asking for. And that's what we call the achievement gap. The achievement gap is a difference between what we would like people and systems to do and what they actually do. So you lay down these plans about entering the European market, but people get distracted and get focused on product A, not the European market or something like that, right? So people and structures will never accomplish exactly what we planned. Then the final thing is a gap between those actions we take and the outcomes. And what that looks like is, we call that the effects gap. And the effects gap is, the difference between what we hope our actions will achieve and what they actually achieve. I was talking to Toby, the CEO of Spotify, the other day, and the best example he gave is, we're busy trying to reduce, nuclear waste and all that kind of stuff. So we're throttling back on those nuclear reactors in Europe, which means the unintended consequence is we have a higher dependence on carbon fuels, oil, gas, and Russia. in this particular case. And so we hoped our actions were actually going to make a cleaner world, but in this case, it actually makes a more polluted world. It's just polluting it in a different bucket and actually creating more pollution in bucket 2 than was being created by bucket 1. So that's the effects gap, the gap between what we hope our actions will achieve and what they actually achieve. So because we have those 3 gaps, that your plans will never be perfect, people and structures never accomplish exactly what we want, and we can't predict exactly how the world will react to what we do. It doesn't matter how good your plan is, it's always going to be wrong. So we spend all this time as FP&A people to try to get more and more accurate plans to get past that, my metaphor of 97% accuracy. But it doesn't matter how well we plan, because of those 3 weaknesses, it's always going to be wrong. So what we need to do is now begin building an element of agility into our planning process. And your listeners are going to yank their hair out going, what is Brett talking about? It takes us 16 weeks to cut a plan. That can't be more agile. Like, that is just 16 weeks. But what if I put ChatGPT in there? So what ChatGPT does is it allows us to instantly identify disconnect. So, disconnect 1 is our plans aren't perfect because we don't know the whole world. Well, if we list off all of our assumptions and ask GPT to monitor if any of those assumptions come true or don't come true, we'll immediately know the plan's going off base. If the achievement gap, right, that people and structures will never accomplish exactly what we planned. If we say to ChatGPT, monitor whether these plans are actually getting executed and we're seeing that in actions, and tell me the instant that's not happening. Once again, the moment the plan begins to go sideways, I get notified. And then the effects gap is, we think we've done something that will have a specific effect and it has a different effect. Monitor and see if we're actually getting the outcomes that we expected from our actions. Now, that monitoring device builds in tripwires or warnings to us that allow us to react more quickly. Now, I still need the right inputs. It does the monitoring. I still need to make the decisions on the output. It's not AI. So it's not what Betsy's talking about of AI, but it's pretty darn better than what we currently have, where we're doing all those things manually and de facto missing many early warning signals as these things go sideways.
I think in a lot of FP&A teams, a lot of experimentation is going on, but open our minds to what some of the possible inputs could be now that we have these types of tools available. What are the types of prompts that should be sort of fed into the system for those of us maybe lacking some imagination?
So imagine that I want to set up a strategy for my company, right? For the step 1 of FP&A. So if I feed it my organization's previous strategy, I feed it my organization's current OKRs, its budgets, its plans. I feed it what our current market share is, what our pricing is, what our pricing strategies are. That stuff all makes sense. But then I also add in the organization chart. I add in every person's career plans. I add in their performance reviews. Now you begin going, gosh, with those inputs, what would I do? But then, of course, I know of every single meeting that goes on in the organization, every single task that's been assigned, and who's got what done. So I'm going to feed all that into it as well. But wait, there's more. Now I'm going to take a look at my competitor. I can put in my competitor's strategies or the best I can surface, and you'd be amazed at how much you can find. I can put in their budgets and plans, whatever I can surface, you'd be amazed what you can find. I can put in their organization chart. What I can also do are things like put in their personnel's LinkedIn profiles. We discovered last year, and we reported this in one of our other podcasts, that in that Great Resignation last year, about 70% of employees, people that had a job, also posted on their LinkedIn profile available for other opportunities. Now, HR doesn't know that because they don't go take a look at it, but GPT can take a look at that. So imagine this, right? So we say, we're going to go penetrate Australia with this strategy. GPT goes, well, that's interesting. Your competitor did the same thing, and 80% of their sales team are now looking for new jobs. But wait, there's more. Then I can feed it from other businesses, the same thing. Their strategies, their markets, their LinkedIn profiles, their people. Then I can do add in, what do our stakeholders want? So what do investors want from this business? What do our communities want? What do regulators want? Then I can feed in stuff about the economy. Then I could feed in things about new technologies. When you begin adding this stuff up, your brain goes, like, the quality of ideas that could come from this. I've called it the GPT metaverse. Like, once you begin building those inputs in, it's not surprising you get brilliant outcomes from this. And the impacts on FP&A is a tsunami. Like, it's just absolutely.
But here we are in this strange environment, economic times, certainly so much uncertainty in the wake of Silicon Valley Bank collapse and, the continued rise of interest rates and the tech recession. How is that going to resolve for it to happen now, for this type of experimentation to be happening now in this environment? It's just
You're right. We're in this moment of economic uncertainty, and there's many disruptors out there. We haven't even finished digesting the monster that was COVID. Then we have these geopolitical issues. You got economic issues. We got what's going on with the banks. So we can't forecast our way out of there. We can't think our way out. So rather than fighting the turbulence, how do you roll with it? How do you build more agility? I agree that ChatGPT is a disruptor, but it happens to be the fortuitous disruptor that allows us to deal with the uncertainty that's there. It is the very tool that will help us deal with this uncertainty. Because again, we list down our assumptions, and that's what we did to build our plan. The second any of those assumptions prove to be untrue, GPT tells us and tells the implications of them not being true, and therefore I can redo the plan without that 16-week cycle.
Brett Knowles, it was great to have you join us on Planning Aces.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I don't think this is anywhere near the end of where we need to go with FP&A, but our brains are exhausted at this point in time. So my suggestion to you is take the rest of the day off.
Thank you, Brett. Brett and I have to return to Earth, and we're exiting the GPT metaverse. Thank you for listening.